Good evening, everyone. I am Saurabh Jain, your host for the day, and I have Advocate Gaurav Bahel, who is a very senior advocate practicing in Delhi High Court, and he will be solving our queries relating to legal aspects of startups. So, welcome, Gaurav.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you very much.
So, today our topic is legal for startups. So, basically, I have the first question from you. So as far as a layman like me is concerned, legal system is very complex. We have criminal laws, civil laws, we have constitution, we have courts, we have police. So we have so many authorities. So can you just to start with, give us some overview of the legal system which is applicable to startups? Because generally as a common man, it becomes very complicated to think of the legal system, and generally most common people are afraid of the legal system.
No, there is nothing to worry so far as you are compliant with the legal system. Most of your laws which are applicable on startups are primarily based on how much do you comply with. Then it is followed by how many rights do you want yourself to be protected of, and how do you register yourselves with the organizations? How do you proceed further when you're working as a startup? And you have to understand primarily when and how you become a startup. It is very important to understand that what is a startup in terms of the act and the rules and notifications which have come from time to time. I'm sure a lot of people here would be aware about what is a startup. But just as an overview, if you want to understand, then I think there are only 3 pointers which you have to understand. That you have to be registered either as a company or as an LLP or as a registered partnership. It should not have been more than 10 years. Your last, any financial turnover should not be more than 100 crores. And then obviously we all know that you have to be innovative. You have to do a business which reflects of reconstruction or anything else. And then obviously it should not be a split up from already existing company. Now, these are the very, very basic structures on which your particular startup is. That is how a startup is recognized. Now, how do you look at the laws? The laws that you have to be primarily concerned with is your labor law issue. You have to be concerned with your intellectual property rights. You have to be clear about your contract acts. You have to be clear about your registrations. You have to be clear about your income tax. You have to be clear about your MSME related issues. And you have to be also aware of, very important is the Companies Act or the Partnership Act or the LLP Act under which you are going to get yourself registered. Now, when you say there are various laws, when we were studying law, we were told there are about 41,000 central legislations, and you leave aside the state legislations. And I'm sure over the period of time, about 25 odd years, more and more laws have come in, more and more laws have brought in. So obviously I cannot cover 41,000 laws. Not every 41,000 law would be applicable. But primarily you may look at is the Companies Act, the Contract Act, Sales of Goods Act, GST, Income Tax Act, MSME, and labor laws related issues. These are primarily your concerns, and more or less, if you are involved in certain industry where there is pollution, then environmental laws. So these are primarily those laws which you should be concerned about. Your constitutional, your criminal law, your civil laws, these are into operation only if you do anything illegal. For the startup, the most important aspect is the compliance. Now, these are all such laws which are compliance related and which also protects your interest vis-a-vis entire world. So that is where it is. So let us only concentrate on the laws which are immediately applicable. The list is long for applicable laws to any individual or any entity.
So, what do you think? So, as a startup, if you have to recruit some employees, what kind of laws are applicable on employees and labor?
Again, Saurabh, you have about 70 industrial laws which cover about the issues which are related to Industrial Disputes Act, payment of minimum wages act, insurance. These are all such laws, but in terms of the government initiatives which have come forward, which are compliance related laws, there are about 9 laws which have been given a compliance issue, which is on a self-declaratory basis. So I can tell you all those laws, which are those laws which are on self-declaratory basis. The first is your Payment of Gratuity Act. Second is your Contract Labor Act. Then your Employees Provident Fund Act, Employees State Insurance Act, Interstate Migrant Workmen Act, Building and Other Constructions Act. So these are about 6, and then you have Water Pollution Act, then Air Pollution Act, Water Cess Act. These are such acts which are applicable, and you have to ensure that these acts are complied with. But if you are keeping an employee, then Industrial Disputes Act is what you have to look at in the first and the foremost place, because that's when an employee becomes a workman, and there are definitions given under Industrial Disputes Act. If a workman is not treated well, he is not paid wages, or he is discriminated against, he has a right to go against the organization before a labor court. However, if the person becomes a manager and he is a reportee, he has people reporting to him, then it goes out of the window of Industrial Disputes Act. Then he will have to file a civil suit to seek his recoveries. So what an ideal startup should do is prepare a contract with an employee, detail out certain rights, detail out certain liabilities, put in certain clauses which ensures that a startup as a company is beneficial to both the employee and the founder or the employer. So the first and the foremost that you may have to look at is Industrial Disputes Act. You may also have to look at the Payment of Gratuity Act. Then you have to look at the issue of contract labor, because contract labor at times what happens is that you go and procure labor from outside, or you take people without registration of your contracts, which is very, very important, and it is damaging for the startups to not register their contracts. And when there are exemptions granted by the central government, then those exemptions should be utilized, and it should be utilized in a manner which is best possible, both for the startup as well as for the employee. And the list is long. There you have to be compliant, but there are self-declarations which are provided by the government of the 9 labor laws. So what happens is that the inspector will not come to the organization. You have to give a self-declaration that, see, I am compliant with these particular issues. And these are such laws which ensures that you have a safe environment. You are not harassing the people. The females who are there are safe. There are certain guidelines issued by the Supreme Court on sexual harassment of females that are being complied with. And there are maternity benefits being given. So all these issues have to be looked in, and they have to be properly contracted when you enter into a contract with your employees.
Okay. Doing contracts with customers or vendors. So basically, any business, any startup has to do a lot of contracts with vendors and customers. So can you give a little knowledge to us on this aspect?
Sir, it's a very nice question, because what happens is the first and the foremost thing that a startup is required to do is there may be particularly 2 or 3 kind of things that he may be looking at. One could be a vendor related issue. One could be a customer related issue. And one is going to be obviously within the organization. And there is also an issue with regards to the investors. So when there is an investor issue, you have to ensure that you sign a non-disclosure agreement before you even open up yourself with them. You have to ensure that all your terms and conditions are taken care of. whenever you are executing a term sheet, whenever you are discussing an idea with them, whenever you're doing, there is a non-disclosure agreement duly executed with them. My suggestion to all startups is that there is a scheme called MSME, Micro, Small and Medium Enterprise Act, which ensures that if you execute a document with the vendor or with the customer or with anybody, and tomorrow that person fails to make the payment to you, then under that act, not only your money is saved, but you also get an interest which is 1.5 times the PLR interest. And there are specific courts, specific tribunals made for MSME. So once you make a contract where you incorporate that you are an MSME registered organization, make a contract which says that your IPRs are in place, make your contract in order to ensure that your liabilities, your issues with regards to dispute resolution, your issues with regards to various other payment terms, other terms are clearly captured in a contract. Now, contract is primarily governed by a Contract Act. And if you're in selling of your goods, then obviously your Sales of Goods Act will kick in. So you have to ensure that once you do all this, you are making a contract in a manner that your rights, liabilities, obligations are clearly recorded in an agreement, no matter what kind of an agreement. If an agreement requires a registration, ensure that it is registered. Do not go by non-registration, because the first thing that a startup getting a due diligence done or whether appropriate compliances have happened in due period of time or not. A very small issue that if a particular startup is on a rented premises, then he has to ensure that there is a registered lease agreement between him and the person who's the landlord. Because at times what happens, in order to move around, they say, let's have it only for 11 months. I do not require a registration. You want to skirt the law. So instead of skirting the law, it is appropriate to get it registered, because it not only gives the boost to the investors, it also helps you to have a better rights in the said property. So if you are asking me that if I am as a customer, if I am as a vendor, ensure that your rights and liabilities are clearly recorded in the agreement. Whatever are your available rights, suppose you own an intellectual property right, ensure that it is recorded and it is acknowledged by them. If there are certain payment terms, ensure that the payment terms are clearly marked out. Ensure that if you are an MSME registered, it is clearly marked out that you are MSME and within this time period you have to recover the money. So these are broad issues. Obviously, there would be certain very, very industry specific contracts, which will depend what kind of industry is coming up with, what kind of market that it is going to look at. But as much as possible are watertight, so it takes care of you when you are doing the business. Do not leave any open ends whenever you're doing this.
Okay, so I would like to ask people to also ask questions. You can put things in chat box. You can put your questions in chat box. I will be happy to ask. So my next question, Gaurav, is that as you already told that there are IP laws, intellectual property laws applicable on startups, and I have seen a lot of startups are into high-tech areas where obviously intellectual property rights are very important for valuation. So can you tell a little bit about the IP laws, especially the trademark, patents, as well as Copyright Act, etc.?
Okay. So we have to understand that there are 4 laws which we call as intellectual property. One, let me start with the very basic, which is your Trademark Act. Now, Trademark Act is primarily covering what is the trademark of a particular organization. So if you, just as an example, if I say Nike, that's a trademark of an organization. Apple, Adidas. Now they have particular trademarks. Now these trademarks, Pepsi, Coke, these all have gained a particular leverage across the world. So if you see a Reliance product, or if you see an Infosys, or if you see any other startup which is coming up, they all would have certain level of trademarks. Now, that's a mark which immediately identifies the customer with you. So you have to ensure that it has to be unique. You have to ensure that this is particular to your brand, and there is a certain level of connectivity. And most important, that it should not be a rip-off from any other known brand. Don't be, do not be do not hide from inventing or innovating on your trademark, because in the long run, it's a trademark which will become identifiable with your particular thing. Now, your startups like Swiggy, Zomato, they have a very unique trademark. Immediately, if you see that, you will understand that, yes, this is a trademark of a particular organization. So you have to invest both your time, money, and your resources in order to come to a unique trademark. So that's your trademark. Then there are certain copyrights. Copyrights is primarily the manner in which a particular thing is written, how the thing is written, how it is projected across the board. So if you see a tick mark in a Nike, then that is what they have worked as a copyright. So whatever you create an artistic work in that trademark, that is going to be your copyright. Then the third thing is your designs. Now, designs are more or less a semblance of a copyright, but it also looks into the various forms and manner in which a particular thing is designed. So that design is also registrable. Fourth and the most important aspect, which affects our people who are from medical, who are from IT industry, is the Patent Act. Now, Patent Act requires you to register yourself. There are a particular set of guidelines. There is a timeline which is provided for that you register yourself for a patent. You first give them 12 months time period where they give up a particular idea to the authorities. The authority looks into it, and then they call for a, from the prototype, they call for you a detailed scheme of things. So all these 4 acts have to be looked at, and you have to see which is your industry specific. But foremost, I think, is your trademark. Now, if you have to go into the legalities, how the trademark is done, is that what your question is also? That how a trademark is registered? Or
Yeah.
do you think?
Yes, you can tell a little bit about the registration process so that people have some idea how they can proceed.
So ideally what happens is, Saurabh, there are particular set of forms available, which are statutory forms, and there are fees provided. So a statutory fees is to be paid, and you have to give your representation for a trademark, and you file it with the registry. Now, each particular region has a separate trademark office with it, all divided into north, south, east, and west. So depending which jurisdiction you are in, you can approach that particular office, file your application. You would ideally need an IPR attorney or a lawyer who's practicing as a IPR attorney. He will make that document for you. You have to pay your statutory fees, and then it is presented. And then there is a process. If there is an objection from any other aspect, you have to meet those objections. If those objections are cleared, then your trademark gets published in the Gazette, and then you have a registered trademark. Now, in between this, there's just one more thing that you have to understand, is that the government today offers a discount that if you're registered as an startup, then instead of a statutory fee of 10,000, it gives you a benefit of 50% rebate, which is about 5,000. So it helps you to be a registered startup before, at the time, if you are applying for a trademark after you register, but you can always do that. Similarly is your copyright, similarly is your design, similarly is your patents. Patents at times require a very, very specialized attorney who has practiced in terms of science and technology, and he understands the issue, and he is in a position to make drawings for you, or he is able to make certain calculations for you before it is presented to the authorities. And again, these are all jurisdictional issues. So depending where your registered office is or where you are carrying out your business, you can go ahead and get yourself registered by filling up the form and filling up the details therein.
Okay, so there is a question that can we go for online registration or do we require like a lawyer and the offline process
On the IPR,
on the IP side?
yes, today it has been made possible. After Corona, it's more possible to go through the online process. But at times they do ask if you have an attorney, because then it becomes easier for them to the authorities to communicate. But yes, you can go ahead and file for your trademark online.
Okay, and what is the general cost to register a trademark and a copyright?
Cost in terms of the lawyer's fees, I
Hey,
can't say, but in terms of statutory fees, yes,
government
it
fee.
is about, government fees is about 10,000, but for a registered startup who's registered with the authority, which is DPIIT, is about 5,000.
Okay, so just to give some summary, I am summarizing. There are a lot of questions now which are coming. I am summarizing what I have learned from Gaurav. So first thing is that there are so many laws in India, 41,000 laws, what he has told us. So obviously, इतने सारे कानून कोई भी याद नहीं कर सकता. So I would say कि like a common man generally wants कि there is some checklist or there is some small like a list which can be followed. I think वो नहीं है इस देश में. Unfortunately, it's too complicated as a legal system. So the practical way out, what Gaurav has told is that we, instead of focusing on learning every law of land, we should focus on what laws are applicable to us. So for any startup, generally most startups are private limited companies. So the basically Companies Act is applicable. Companies Act has a process of creating companies, of managing companies, of running companies. Just to give you some context, which I have learned in practical, is that if you want companies related legal compliance, generally you have to go to a company secretary or a CA, chartered accountant. So they help in formation of company or managing the legal processes for compliances relating to Companies Act. Then once you are registered, tax laws are applicable to you. So income tax, GST is generally applicable to most companies. And like Gaurav told that you, instead of companies, you can even create a partnership company, a limited liability partnership or a general partnership. Both are having their own acts which are applicable. So there is an interesting question which somebody has asked. What is which one is better, OPC versus private limited company? So OPC is one person company versus a general private limited company which has 2 or more directors. Gaurav, do you have any say on that?
See, one person ultimately the compliance is going to be the same, more or less. How many directors are there? How many persons are there? If you are a one-person company, everything falls onto you. So though you will be registered as a company, every compliance is onto your head. Whereas if you are a multi-shareholding, multi-directorship company, it gives a better vision to a particular investor. It's only an optics issue. It's not which is better or which is not. It's only an optics issue. When you go out in the market, then you are in a position to canvas yourself better. Compliances are more or less the same. So if you want to understand that the compliance is lesser in a one company or a multi-person company, it's not too much of a difference. But it's all about optics, I would say that. And it is all about anybody's individual take. You want to be the one-man army on the entire issue, you can go ahead and do it. But tomorrow when the investors come up, you have to take a call that whether that one company does a better work or multi-people company will make a better sense.
So I would like to add here that, see, if you want to create a small business, then one-person company is good. But if you want to create a investable startup where some investor can invest, I would say that you should have a general private limited company, because if you are only a one-person company, then the investor cannot become director in your company. Most investors want to become director in the company. I would advise you to create a private limited company instead of LLP. for a startup. So there is another question that company or LLP, which is the best form? See, LLP has certain compliance benefits. So I know one company secretary or a friend of mine who was earlier a private limited company who has shifted to a LLP because of low legal compliances. As well as in taxation also, there are certain benefits and pros and cons of LLP and companies. But I would say that basically, if you are a startup which wants to take investment from angel investors or from venture capitalist company, because in other forms it generally becomes difficult to incorporate investors. Gaurav, what would you say? Company or LLP? Which one is a better form of organization?
No, I agree with you, Saurabh, on that issue. That compliance-wise, probably LLP may have certain benefits, but then you have to also ensure that you have professionals within the LLP. With your company, you need not have the professionals on board, but with your LLP, there will have to be a specific professional attached to your organization. You may not have a professional attached to you, but you will always require a professional for an LLP. Having said that, shareholding issues and the exemptions under shareholding would only come if you are a company which is a private limited company. So if it's a private limited company, then the exemptions under 81AC and 56 exemptions can only come up with a private limited company. So it's more important. It's primarily, again, as Saurabh said, what is your outlook towards a particular startup? You can start up as an individual also. You can start up as a proprietor, see how your work goes, then tomorrow convert it into an LLP or convert it into a private limited company. You can test the waters based on how things are working. You may start as a one person, as a proprietorship. You don't have any registrations required. You start up as that, test waters, see how good your particular product is in the market, how well it is received in the market, how well are your contracts, how well are people interested into it. And then subsequently, you can graduate yourself from a proprietorship to LLP, or from LLP then to private limited, and from private limited, and if things are going very well, you can also become a public limited company. But it all depends how the business is and what is your outlook towards a particular product that you are making.
Okay. So we have another question. So Ashwini Gupta has a question. If a business does not have any new technology, but is otherwise with strong USP, say in services it provides, can it be registered as a startup? So
Yes,
just
it can
to clarify, so once you create a private limited company, after that, you can go to the Startup India website and you can apply to be a startup. So Startup India has a very small form which you have to fill. In that, they ask you what is uniqueness of your product. So in case of my startup, Fun2Do Labs, it was into education technology, but we were into something new, transmedia education. So it was very easy for me to write. We are doing something new in education called transmedia education, and we wrote 2-3 paragraphs, and they accepted us as a startup. So it's a very easy process, very simple process. Most CAs also help also. But what you have to do is that you have to, if it's a new technology or if it's a new product, then obviously it becomes easier to say that you are a startup. Otherwise, it becomes a little challenging to be registered as a new startup, because at the end of the day, a startup is about something new. It's about a new product, it's about a new technology, or it's about something which can showcase some innovation on your part. So it can be innovation in marketing, it can be innovation in certain aspect. It doesn't need to be innovation in everything. So some innovation is required in Startup India before they accept you as a DPIIT registered startup. Gaurav, do you want to add anything here?
Saurabh, the gentleman who's asked this question, there are 3 things that you have to understand. The first thing is that it should not be 10 years. If you say your company is already incorporated, it should not have crossed 10 years from the date of incorporation, and the turnover should not have crossed 100 crores. Now, innovation is obviously one of the most authentic things or things which they look for. But if you have a scalable business model, which can guarantee employment or wealth creation, that is also looked upon by the government as a startup. So you have to ensure that whatever organization that you have, it has a scalable business model where there can be generation of a lot of employment or a lot of wealth creation. So that needs to be looked at apart from other issues, but it should not be a split up from your already existing company. That needs to be understood, that if you are planning to split up as a company and make it into a separate company, then that will not be taken up as a startup.
Okay, so there is another question. Is there any requirement for minimum capital for registering a startup? As far as I know,
No.
there is no requirement for minimum capital. Generally, you should start a company with 1 lakh capital. I think 1 lakh
That
is
is the basic
generally,
requirement under the Companies Act.
1
there
lakh
is
is
no-
the-
That as a company registration, you may require that amount, but otherwise you don't require that money. There is no minimum threshold.
Yes, DPIIT doesn't say that you need a minimum amount of capital.
No. All it
And-
says is
and-
you have to be registered.
Yes. So there is a very interesting question. What are the risks associated with a startup from legal perspective? Gaurav, it's an interesting question.
Okay, so risks are manifold, as I said in the beginning. But the foremost thing that you have to ensure as a startup, when you have an idea, please ensure that there is a non-disclosure agreement in place whenever you are going out. Because it's only an idea, and if your idea is out of the box and somebody else borrows it, that's the biggest risk for a person who's coming up with an idea. So you have to ensure that your idea is protected. You execute a non-disclosure agreement whenever you're discussing it with any investor, you're discussing it with any other third party from whom you think you can draw up your particular investments. That is the first and the foremost issue. Second issue is the Contract Act applicability, the Sales of Goods Act applicability. Income tax compliances are must. You have to ensure that you are compliant with your income tax issues. You have to do a due diligence with regards to your entire working of the organization, be it terms of your employees, be it terms with your management, be it terms with the maternity issues, be it terms with your sexual harassment issues, be it terms with any other vendor issue. You have to be compliant with all such laws. So there you can be attacked from any place, but if you're compliant with your laws, then you are all shielded. And labor laws, the government has gone ahead and said 9 labor laws compliances, there will not be any inspection. Only thing is there is a self-declaration for those 9 labor laws and 3 environmental laws. And that self-declaration is a very, very easy format to fill in. You fill in that and you are not going to be touched, at least by the government authorities, in so far as your non-compliance of labor laws is concerned, because that's a very, very tricky issue. You may falter on certain laws, you may falter on payment of wages, you may falter on the issue of contract labor, you may falter on Industrial Disputes Act. But if you are self-declarant, then at least your inspections are not there for at least 5 years time period.
Okay, so there is another interesting question before that, but I will like to ask Gaurav that when you go to investors, they do a lot of due diligence first. Second is that they give you a term sheet, and so they give you a term sheet to sign. After the term sheet, they do due diligence, and after that they do shareholders agreement and a lot of other legal stuff. So can you give some clarity on the investor related legal due diligence and legal documents?
See, Saurabh, in my experience, when I have worked with a lot of angel investors also, the first and the foremost thing that they want to find out is where you are not compliant. And that is why I said you have to ensure that you are compliant with everything. And all the laws are primarily applicable are with regards to compliance. So you have to ensure that starting from a very, very small thing, your lease deed is registered. You have filed your returns if you are already registered company. Your annual reports are in order. Your minute books are in order. Your agreements, which means your non-disclosure agreements, your agreements with your vendors, your agreement with your customers are all well documented and are well placed. If you have an IPR, then your IPR is registered or at least filed for registration. So when you have these compliances done, then there is very little scope for any due diligence to come out in so far as non-compliance is concerned. Because half of the time what happens is whenever the investor comes up, the investor looks in for things which you have not done. Like it's actually said when a teacher was saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, then somebody stands up and says, sir, aapne 9 miss kar diya. So that's exactly what investors is going to do. They are going to find one fault which you have not done, and then they will say, now the term sheets have to be in accordance with what we want you to do. So you have to ensure that you are compliant. When you are executing a term sheet, please ensure that the clauses that you are agreeing to, do not see from a short-term point. Please see how it is going to affect you when you actually start doing the business, when it becomes profitable. Because after the term sheet, there will be certain things which will be duly recorded in your share purchase agreement. So once you are doing a share purchase agreement, you have to also ensure that at what time are you going to transfer? What are the issues with regards to compliances which have to happen? So if there are conditions precedent recorded, please ensure those condition precedents are well taken care of, and there must be minimal of those conditions precedent, because most of the conditions precedent are actually emanating from the fact that you have not been compliant with certain issues. So they will say you are going to do this, you are going to do this. But if you've already done that, you get a very good hold wherever you are approaching any investor towards that. So ensure that all these things are actually taken care. As a lawyer, it may sound bizarre for you, but it's important that you have a legal person at your startup, so that your compliances are taken care of, and you have a face with somebody whenever angel investors comes in, that you are able to fight it out with those people and tell them these are our requirements and this is what has to be done. That is all that I can say at the moment.
Okay. So I would like to add one thing. So I have written a book called Startup Masterclass. So online I have put a document, and also in that book I have covered. So this is what is generally covered in a term sheet. So entry conditions, exit conditions, management conditions. And like while I was talking to Gaurav told that so there are all these conditions which have to be written in a term sheet and in a detail. Gaurav, do you want to add any point here based on this?
So Saurabh, what happens is that this is a term sheet which is ideally prepared by all angel investors, and it is thrown upon the startups that this is what you have to do. All that you need to understand is this: that if somebody is coming into the organization, he's trying to buy you out, he's going to give you money, he's going to buy your idea, he's going to commercialize your idea, your rights have to be protected. So once your rights are being protected, you have to ensure that how the valuation is being done. Please engage appropriate chartered accountant for the valuation purposes. Please ensure that there is a shareholding pattern which is conducive to what you are looking at. You may have heard people giving away huge amounts of shareholding, but you have to understand that tomorrow this is going to get affected for you. There are condition precedents which have to be looked at. Why and when these conditions precedent, in my experiences, more and more you are non-compliant, more and more condition precedents gets triggered in. So it's appropriate that you are compliant with the laws, and the lesser the condition precedents, the better it is for your issues.
Okay.
You should have an exit strategy, obviously. That's paramount. The exit strategy has to be in a format that you do not go high and dry, and you are in a position that you earn out of what you have already done. And then, I mean, there are term sheets after term sheets, and they develop depending upon the industry, the kind of services that you're providing, the kind of issues that you are tackling.
So there is an interesting question that is there any good book in market which lists out the important points for layman? Yes, Ashwini, it's a very interesting question. I have written a book called Startup Masterclass, although it's not that big. A book right now, it's a 131-page book because I wanted it to be a little smaller and easier to read book. So this is available as a online book on Amazon. So here I have covered a lot of things which we are discussing today. It's not focused purely on legal aspects. It is on product management, startup best practices, startup HR and fundraising. But you will find this book interesting. Interestingly, Mr. Vijay Shekhar Sharma, the founder of Paytm, has written a foreword for my book and he liked my book. So I will just share the URL of the book here in chat so that Ashwin and others can benefit from it. So coming to another question. So there is an interesting question. Which state is more encouraging to startups? So Kanan has this question. Kanan, I can give you because I was earlier vice president in Paytm and I was managing the startup relationships for Paytm. I have been as a speaker from Ladakh to Trivandrum. So I would say that out of going to more than 18, 19 states, I found a few states which have very active startup programs. For example, Gujarat has a very active startup program. Telangana has a T-Hub. It's a startup incubator called T-Hub. As well as there is Kerala Startup Mission by Kerala, which is relatively active. So there are some states which are relatively active. Interestingly, I don't want to be political, but I have seen that generally some states are active when BJP government is there. So for example, in Rajasthan, I was able to go to their startup incubation center in Jaipur, which was started by Vasundhara Raje. I have just come to know that it is not very active in Rajasthan right now, but it was a very active program during Vasundhara Raje days. So a lot of startups are being promoted by various state governments from various inclinations. Like for example, Kerala is quite active, Telangana is active, Gujarat is active, as well as a lot of other states which are less active, but which have interesting startup programs. So even Jammu Kashmir has a startup program, Uttarakhand has a startup program, UP has a startup mission. UP government even gives funding. So I am on the incubation committee of JSS incubator in Noida, which is being funded by Startup India as well as UP government from time to time. So many states are encouraging startups. Some have reduced the legal compliances for startups in their own states. Gaurav, do you want to add anything here?
Just one thing that I will not go state specific or any specific. I think more why this question could be there is because how you work your startup. Registration is all centralized. Everything is centralized. Now there are specific public procurement programs, which I think should be known to one and all. Now these public procurement is primarily your tender issues. Now, Ministry of Industry has come out with a notification as early as 2016 and 17, where they carved out two particular issues. One was an MSME and one was a startup. Now, there are certain issues whenever a tender comes up, the tender wants you to have a certain level of shareholding, certain level of experience, certain level of turnover. All these things have been done away. So once you apply for a government tender, all government tenders today, I won't say whether it's a central government or a state government or any other thing, all government tenders mandatorily have a clause that if you're a startup, then you are also eligible to bid for that particular thing. Let me put it like a public sector undertaking, like you have a BSNL. So BSNL does have a specific particular issue. There are medical organizations which come up with tenders, and there is a specific issue carved out or segment carved out that if you're a startup, then these particular aspects of your turnover, your shareholding, your years of experience is taken care of. There are exemptions, and you are able to bid for yourself under the category of a tender as a startup or as an MSME. So primarily, I think I will not, as Saurabh said, that it could be a little political here and there, but the issue is that today it is compliant. You are compliant with the issue. If you are eligible as a startup, then there are public procurement programs which can help a startup to go from where it is to a different level while filing for the tenders.
Okay, so I would also advise that people who are attending should become members of YLC. Some of them will be members of Young Leaders Council of IMA. I would say you should join that, because we also do a lot of programs for startups from time to time. So for example, there is a Stanford Seed Spark program, so by Stanford University. So that program is being given to YLC members of IMA. So it would be good. So if you join us in YLC, because we have a lot of programs from time to time for startups. So there is a very interesting question. Can we get funding for food industry startups? If yes, please. Yes, you can get funding for food industry startup. There are angel investors who specialize. For example, I know there was one entrepreneur who started Wow Momos. He got funding because he was a food entrepreneur. There, I personally have met Yo China founder, so he got funding. So a lot of food industry entrepreneurs get funding from specialized angel investors who specialize in food startups.
All that I would say is then you have to be compliant with your Food and Safety Act. So
Okay.
that is why I said, Saurabh, that's why I said, if you have so many legislations, some are very, very industry specific. So somebody comes and says, I am from an information technology, or I am a startup which is working for online gaming. Now you have a very different set of rules for online gaming under the information technology rules.
Okay.
So you have to be, if you're an intermediary, there are intermediary rules under information technology act. So for those people, these acts will become very, very important.
Okay, so
So
for food, you are saying food and safety.
You have to be
regulations are
compliant.
there. I understand from time to time we hear that, for example, in Maggie case, in Patanjali case, we have already heard about these
You will
things getting
hear,
media attention.
yes, you will hear all these things, but there are issues with regards to funding. Now there are about 3-4 funds which are there, which are called funds of startup, which is an FFS. Then there is a startup India seed fund scheme. Then there is a credit guarantee scheme for startups. Now these are few of those schemes which are there by the government, which helps the organizations as a startup to seek reliance from a public sector undertaking or some other, instead of an angel investor, which is a private.
Yes, so
issue.
Startup India seed fund is a very interesting and good scheme. I can tell you about that because I am on the funding committee of the JSS incubator, which was funded by Startup India seed scheme. So what happens is that you go to Startup India website, they tell you that what are the incubators who are being funded under the scheme. You can apply for funding under an incubator. So for example, people who were applying to JSS incubator, first JSS team used to vet them. So for example, if 50 people apply, JSS team used to vet all those and shortlist 5 top out of them. Of those 5, me and 4 or 5 other judges used to check them, and then we used to recommend whether you should fund them or not. So there, especially food startups can easily apply because food startups were actively seeked there. There are a lot of innovation can happen in food, and India obviously being a nation of so many people, we need innovation in food. So you can go there, and there is a question how to approach angel investors, etc. in food. I would advise join forums like IMA, TIE. These can be approached. There are angel funds, for example, Indian Angel Network. There is Venture Catalyst. There are these angel groups which can be invested, which are investing. So you can just search them on Google and try to find a few active funds where you can go. For example, Venture Catalyst is very active in deal space. V Founder Circle is very active in deal space. So you can go to them. So there is a question by Rishi Jagmohan Singh. Any tips for training startup? See, there are a lot of people training startups. In YLC, we have a lot of mentors who are doing training of startups. In fact, there is a mentor-mentee program in Young Leaders Council of IMA. If you become a YLC member, you can join that and become a mentee.
and a lot of senior members from the industry can mentor you. Okay. So these are the questions. So I'm having one or two more questions. I am just trying to find. So there is a question for Gaurav that is there any legal checklist which can be it becomes very easy for a layman to just go and take a checklist and just comply with that. Is that possible, or is that not possible at all?
Nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible. If you are industry specific, then as I said, you have to ensure that these are industry specific issues which can be looked at. Your primary issues when you open up a company, and you can just take down if you want, is your compliances under Companies Act. And you have auditors, you have company secretaries, you have lawyers who specifically only work on company laws compliances. And there is a checklist which is available on the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. You can go there. The Contract Act and the Sales of Goods Act applicability is from the issue of general law perspective. Those kick in only when you start working towards. Non-disclosure agreements is obviously coming out from a contract law issue. Then you have intellectual property rights, which is again, there is a checklist available on ipgovernment.in where you know how to do it. Then with regards to labor laws, as I said, there are about 9 labor laws as of today, which are not exempted, but for which there can be no inspection for next 1 year from your date of incorporation, and from 2nd year till about 3 years thereafter, there will be an inspection only if there is a complaint, CS complaint against non-compliance. Otherwise, on a self-certification basis, they allow you to go ahead with that. Then you have your issues with regards to share purchase agreement. Again, these are arising from 2 sets of laws, which is your Contract Act and which is your Companies Act or your LLP. As Saurabh had said, that his book also contains what all other issues have to be covered when you are working on a term sheet. Those can obviously be looked at, that whether my term sheet covers all that or not, because the list is long. Each term sheet will have certain specific issues, and some would be very, very industry specific or based on how you are operating. So then you have property rights issues. Property rights means you have a ownership, you have a leasehold rights, you have any other rights in your immovable properties. Then you will have due diligence issues, which are again coming up from the Companies Act, and these are broadly your issues which can be looked at the time of starting your issue, starting your startup. Once there is a jump start, then all these things come into play and you will be able to work yourself through. So I think these are broader things. And yes, I'm sorry, income tax and GST related issues.
Okay. So there are 2 questions. So one is any healthcare specific government funds. So I would say that their government has a very interesting and active program called BIRAC. So BIRAC is a program for biotechnology. So anything related to any innovation related to biotechnology is funded through BIRAC. BIRAC funds various incubators and it invests in a lot of startups through that mechanism. So I personally know a startup which was funded by BIRAC, which was creating bacteria which could eat chemicals, and it was for pollution control. So in healthcare, you can, if you are doing something innovative, you can reach out to BIRAC supported incubators and you can get funding from BIRAC. And if it is just a very service oriented thing and not something technical and not something innovative, then generally BIRAC doesn't cover. BIRAC covers only technical innovation as far as my knowledge is concerned. There is an interesting question by Vishnu Rao. So it says that he is into food trucks and developing an application. So he asks, what is the funding process? See, Vishnu, funding process I have covered in my book. So it is general. The funding process is that once you achieve product market fit, it is easy to get funding. Product market fit means that there is a demand for your product. Before that,
only angel investors can fund you. So once you are very clear what you are building, you can reach out to angel investors. Reaching out to angel investors is through various mechanisms. One is you can do Google search and then try to reach out to some investors as cold emails or as like in various forums. For example, there are startup events hosted by TIE every year. TI is the Indus Entrepreneurs. There are other organizations which are hosting startup events. You can reach out to angel investors in startup events. You can also try to be active on social media. Sometimes angel investors, if they like, they follow you, and they so mostly it becomes easier to approach an angel investor if you know somebody whom the investor respects, or if that investor follows you on social media. If you just do a cold call, it becomes a little difficult to get invested. But these days, things are getting easier. Many angel networks are there who have forms on their website. You can reach out to them. For example, Venture Catalyst has a very active program. Anybody can reach out to them, and they generally, if you are worth the investment, they generally consider you. And then once you have product market fit, you have demand for active demand for the product. Then you can do what you can do is that you can reach out to venture capital firms. There also, if you reach out through some person who is known to them, it becomes easy, because generally cold calling doesn't help too much. But it all depends. It depends on your goodwill. It depends on your like level of product market fit, as well as level of success you have had. So it all depends, but it is relatively difficult process, because and then there are government incubation programs also. Like I'm saying that there are various incubators who are funded by Startup India. They are funded by Department of Science and Technology. They are funded by MIT, which is Ministry of Information Technology. So a lot of such funding is being given by government also these days, especially in early part of the process, where you require 20 lakhs, 30 lakhs, 50 lakhs kind of money. If you require more money, then obviously going to venture capitalists who invest from 2 crores to up to even 20, 30 crores is better. But it's a complex topic, as well as you may have to reach out to 20, 30, even 50 investors before getting investment. So if one or two investors turn you away, it's a common thing. Even a successful company like Cisco was turned away by 49 investors before the 50th one invested in it. So with that, we have reached the end of the session. I would like to thank Gaurav. Gaurav, I learned a lot from you today. And
Thank you. I have also learned.
I
It
would
is
like to
likewise.
I would like to just recollect what I learned. So basically, what I learned is that laws in India are quite complex. It is better to be focused on what laws are applicable to me, and then you should try to basically hire some good legal person. So there are three kinds of legal person available. So one is company secretary, one is chartered accountant, and one is lawyer. So company secretaries are generally focused more on Companies Act related compliances. Chartered accountants are more focused on Companies Act, Income Tax Act, GST Act, etc. And then there are lawyers who are on various aspects of laws. So be it labor laws, be it IP laws, be it general laws in general, like Contracts Act, etc. These are the core competence of lawyers. And if you have to God forbid, but if you have to do any litigation, then there are active litigation specialists like Gaurav whom can be approached. So with that, I would like to thank Gaurav, and it was
Thank you very much, all.
yes.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, Rhythm, for having me. And it was lovely interacting with one and all. In fact, I have also learned a couple of things from Saurabh today with regards to how the funding has to happen, and how many certain other fundraisers and funders or investors are available in the market. But it's been an enriching experience. Thank you all.
Okay, so I would like to close the session now. I have just shared my Twitter credentials. If somebody wants to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter. I am available at SKJ Saurabh. So with that, I would like to close the session. Over to you, Rhythm.
Thank you very much.
Over to you, Rhythm.
Route नहीं कर पा रही.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining the session. Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you, Saurabh.
Thank you very much, Rhythm, for having me. Hope your questions were answered.
Yes, they were. Thank you so much.
Thank you.